My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 72 years old, and just weeks after my daughter's wedding, my new son-in-law showed up on my doorstep with papers to have me declared incompetent. Before I tell you how his attempt to steal my late husband's $33 million inheritance backfired so spectacularly it ended with me at the White House, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of quiet, sunny day in Oak Creek, Ohio that feels safe. I was about to water my hydrangeas when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole I saw him, Caleb Sterling, my new son-in-law. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, looking every bit the successful young man my daughter Olivia had fallen for. But the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. It was a practiced, polished thing, and it made my blood run cold. I opened the door just a crack. "Caleb, what a surprise." "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I was hoping we could talk." He held up a thick manila folder. It looked official. It looked dangerous. "This is for your own good. For your protection." My hand tightened on the doorknob. I knew in that instant this wasn't about protection. This was about control. This had my husband George's inheritance written all over it. This was a home invasion without a weapon. "What is that?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the sudden, sickening lurch in my stomach. "It's just some paperwork, Eleanor. To help you manage things. We're worried you're getting overwhelmed." He took a step forward, a predator cloaked in concern. Overwhelmed. The word hung in the air. An insult wrapped in a lie. How did it come to this? How did the man who swore to love and protect my only child now stand on my porch trying to steal my life from me? My mind reeled back just a few short weeks to the wedding. It was held at the Richmont Country Club, a place where the glassware cost more than my first car. I felt like a stranger in a foreign land. Olivia was radiant, of course. She floated in a cloud of white lace, her eyes shining with a love that made my heart ache with both pride and a strange, unshakable sense of dread. But as the guests arrived, the social pecking order was made brutally clear. Caleb's parents, the Sterlings, swept in like visiting royalty. His mother wore enough diamonds to fund a small country. She air-kissed her way through the important people, her eyes gliding right over me as if I were part of the wallpaper. It was a masterclass in polite dismissal. Then came the seating chart. I found my name at table 19, tucked away in a corner behind a floral monstrosity that could have hidden a small car. It offered a spectacular view of a service entrance. I was the embarrassing middle-class mother-in-law, to be hidden away from the real guests. I smiled sweetly at the frazzled wedding planner and took my seat in my horticultural prison. From there I watched my new son-in-law. Caleb was a performer. I watched him work the room with surgical precision. He had a megawatt smile for the obviously wealthy investors, a look of practiced respect for his parents' influential friends, and complete indifference for anyone who looked like they might need a favor instead of offering one. He wasn't just a husband, he was a businessman closing a deal. And my daughter, my sweet, trusting Olivia, was the prize. Late in the evening, after charming every person of consequence in the room, he finally made his way toward me. He moved with a confident, easy grace that I now recognized as predatory. The dazzling smile he turned on me was the one I'd seen him use on the wealthiest man in the room, the one reserved for a target. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic warning bell. He stopped in front of my table, looming over me, his shadow falling across the white linen. He watched me with an unnerving stillness, the predatory smile never leaving his face. "Isn't this just magical?" he said, his voice a low, smooth purr that was probably meant to be charming. He gestured vaguely at the opulent reception hall, a dismissive wave of a perfectly manicured hand. "You must be bursting with pride, Eleanor." The use of my first name was a calculated choice. Not Mom. Not even the more formal Mrs. Vance. It was a subtle but clear signal, a way of establishing a new hierarchy where I was not the matriarch but appeared to be managed. Pride wasn't the right word for the cocktail of emotions churning in my gut. It was a tangled, bitter knot of overwhelming love for my radiant daughter and a deep, primal distrust for the man she had just bound her life to. "I'm practically vibrating with maternal joy," I replied, my voice pitched to a tone of sweet, grandmotherly delight. It was a voice I hadn't used in years, the one I reserved for difficult people. "Though I must say the view from here is quite unique." I've developed a sudden and profound appreciation for the intricate beauty of hibiscus. If he caught the sarcastic barb in my tone, he gave no sign. Ignoring unpleasant truths was clearly a skill he had perfected. He was a professional, and this was just another negotiation. I was hoping. He leaned in, his expensive cologne washing over me, a scent both cloying and sterile. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were sharing a great secret. That you and I could have dinner this week. Just the two of us. I think it's so very important that we get the chance to really know each other properly. Properly. The word hung there, loaded with implication. As if our relationship up to this point, polite and distant as it was, had been improper. As if he, the newcomer, the interloper, had the right to set the terms of our engagement. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. How refreshing, I said, picking up my cloth napkin and fanning myself in a parody of a flustered Southern belle. Most young men are so eager to get to know their new mother-in-law before the wedding. But I do admire your commitment to doing things in your own, unique chronological order. This time a reaction. It was microscopic, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, a flicker in the muscles of his jaw. The perfect, polished smile faltered for a nanosecond before snapping back into place. He saw the steel beneath the soft, grandmotherly exterior, and he didn't like it. It's been a whirlwind, he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. You know how it is. Work, planning all of this. He gestured again, this time with a hint of impatience. How about Thursday? I know a wonderful place downtown, the Gilded Sparrow. It's very private. Perfect for a meaningful conversation. Meaningful conversations about what? My prize-winning roses? The latest neighborhood gossip? Oh, I knew precisely what kind of meaningful conversation he had in mind. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. This was a reconnaissance mission to assess the target, to probe for weaknesses, to calculate the value of the asset me, and the cost of acquiring it. A mystery dinner. How utterly exciting. I chirped, my voice an octave higher than usual. I can hardly contain my excitement. I'll have to check my very busy social calendar. He let out a low practiced chuckle. It wasn't a sound of genuine amusement. It was the sound a banker makes when a lucrative deal is about to close. Excellent. I'll make the reservation for 7 o'clock. He straightened up, his mission accomplished. With a final dazzling smile that was all teeth and no warmth, he turned and glided away, back to the world of money and influence, leaving me marooned in my floral fortress. I caught my reflection in a large gilded mirror across the room. I saw a silver-haired woman in a simple gray dress, a woman who looked like she worried about heating bills and shopped with coupons. I looked exactly like what he thought I was. A harmless, slightly dotty widow with a modest pension, a paid-off house, and not a single clue about the cruel, sharp-edged world he inhabited. It was an image I had carefully cultivated since my George passed away. It was my armor. It was my camouflage. And I had a sickening feeling it was about to be put to the ultimate test. Driving home in my reliable 10-year-old sedan, I couldn't shake the memory of George meeting Caleb for the first and only time. George was already frail, confined to his favorite armchair, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Caleb had visited for all of 15 minutes, a whirlwind of charm and firm handshakes. After he left, I fluffed George's pillow and asked him what he thought. He was quiet for a long time, looking out the window. Then he turned to me, his eyes clear and serious. That boy's eyes are like a shark's, Ellie, he'd said, his voice a dry rasp. Dead. All appetite. I had dismissed it then, telling myself George was just being a protective, grumpy old man. Now, his words felt less like a grumble and more like a prophecy etched in stone. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar comfort of my small home, a stark contrast to the cold dread coiling in my stomach. This house was my sanctuary, the repository of my entire life. But as I turned the key in the lock, the quiet click sounded like a ticking clock. The wolves were not at the door. I had just invited the alpha wolf inside for dinner, and he was planning to have me for the main course. The days leading up to my dinner with Caleb were a form of psychological torture. Olivia would call every day from her honeymoon, her voice a symphony of newlywed bliss. She talked about the turquoise water, the black sand beaches, and the endless, wonderful conversations she and Caleb were having about their future. "He's so thoughtful, Mom," she said in one call, her voice thick with adoration. "He's not just thinking about us. He's genuinely worried about you all alone in that big house. He wants to make sure you're secure." The words, meant to be a testament to his character, were a chilling confirmation of his agenda. He wants to make sure you're secure. It was the language of a warden, not a son-in-law. Every loving word from my daughter was a painful reminder of how thoroughly she had been deceived. She was caught in a beautifully constructed web, and she didn't even know it. They returned on a Saturday, looking like a couple from a travel magazine, all sun-kissed skin and radiant smiles. They stopped by my house the following afternoon, bringing the obligatory box of chocolate-covered macadamia nuts. We gathered in my living room, the room where Olivia had taken her first steps, the room filled with decades of happy, honest memories. Now it felt tainted by Caleb's presence. He didn't relax. He perched on the edge of the armchair, his eyes constantly scanning, cataloging, assessing. He was not visiting a home. He was casing a property. "I'll go get us some of that fresh squeezed lemonade you love," I said to Olivia, forcing a cheerful smile as I headed towards the kitchen. The old swinging door that separated the kitchen from the dining room was notorious for not closing properly. I'd meant to fix it for years. Now I was grateful for my procrastination. It swung to, leaving a 2-inch gap. I was reaching for the glass pitcher in the fridge when I heard Caleb's voice, carefully pitched to a tone of deep, earnest concern. "I'm just really concerned, honey," he said to Olivia. "I don't want to alarm you, but did you notice how she couldn't find the photo album right away when you asked? And at the wedding, she called me George for a second before correcting herself." The pitcher felt heavy and cold in my hand. He was a masterful liar. Not a single word of it was true. I had retrieved the album from the bottom shelf of the bookshelf, exactly where it had been for the last 10 years. And I would have sooner called him the devil than mistake him for my beloved George. I heard the rustle of fabric as Olivia shifted on the sofa. Her voice when it came was soft, but laced with a new thread of uncertainty. "Well, she's been under a lot of stress, Caleb. The wedding was a lot for her. And she's still lonely, I think." Of course. Caleb's voice was a soothing balm of poison. "And I love her for her strength. But we have to be realistic, Olivia. She's 72. She's all alone here. What happens if she has a fall and can't reach the phone? What if she forgets to pay the electric bill and the power gets shut off in the middle of winter? Or worse, what if some scammer calls her on the phone and convinces her to give away her savings? An elderly woman living alone is a prime target for predators. We need to think about putting some legal protections in place. It's the responsible thing to do. It's for her own good. A prime target for predators. The sheer, unmitigated hypocrisy of it was staggering. He was the predator standing in my living room warning my daughter about other predators. Also, he could be the one to bleed me dry. I stood there, hidden in my own kitchen, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was a betrayal so profound, so cold and calculated, it felt like a physical blow. He wasn't just trying to get his hands on my assets. He was methodically, cruelly trying to steal my daughter's perception of me. He was painting me as a doddering, incompetent old woman, a liability who needed to be managed. He was trying to erase the strong, capable mother who had raised her, and replace her with a fragile caricature that fit his narrative. A white-hot rage, an emotion I hadn't felt in years, surged through me. My first primal instinct was to storm out of that kitchen, to throw the lemonade in his smug, handsome face and expose him for the venomous snake he was. But I choked it down. I knew with absolute certainty that it was the wrong move. An outburst would only serve his purpose. It would make me look hysterical, unstable, living proof of the decline he was so artfully inventing. Olivia, caught in the crossfire, wouldn't know who or what to believe. So I took a deep, shuddering breath. I composed my face into a mask of serene calm. I pushed the kitchen door open and walked back into the living room, a tray with 3 clinking glasses of lemonade in my perfectly steady hands. "Here we are," I announced with a bright, cheerful tone. Sorry that took an extra minute. I couldn't for the life of me remember where I'd put the good glasses. I set the tray down on the coffee table and looked directly into Caleb's eyes, holding his gaze. Silly me. I guess I'm getting more forgetful in my old age. The smile he gave me was triumphant. He thought he was winning. He thought I was oblivious. He had absolutely no idea what was running through my veins at that moment. It wasn't fear and it wasn't confusion. It was pure, unadulterated, ice-cold resolve. He had made a fatal error. He had targeted my relationship with my daughter. And for that, I would not just defeat him. I would utterly and completely destroy him. The Gilded Sparrow was a weapon. Every detail of the place, from the oppressively dim lighting to the velvet ropes, was designed to intimidate. The waiters moved with a silent, judgmental grace, and the air was thick with the scent of old money and entitlement. It was Caleb's home turf, and I was the invited intruder. He was already seated in a secluded, high-backed leather booth, looking less like he was waiting for his mother-in-law and more like a king holding court. He rose as I approached, the perfect gentleman, and brushed a kiss against my cheek. His lips were cold, and the gesture felt like a brand. The small talk was a masterclass in veiled hostility. It lasted for exactly 7 minutes, the time it took for the waiter to take our order and pour a wine that I knew, without seeing the price list, cost more than my monthly utility bills combined. "Your garden must be lovely this time of year," he said, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. "It is," I said. "The roses are particularly resilient. They have very deep roots and very sharp thorns. They know how to protect themselves." He gave a slight, dismissive smile and segued seamlessly into his real purpose for being there. "Eleanor," he began, placing his glass down with practiced precision. His voice was a carefully modulated blend of sincerity and authority. "As I've mentioned, Olivia and I are worried. We love you deeply, and because we love you, we want to make sure you're properly taken care of." "I have been taking care of myself for 72 years, Caleb," I said, my voice deliberately light and airy. "I've gotten quite good at it, you know. Practice makes perfect." He waved my comment away as if it were a pesky fly. "Of course you have. You're an incredibly strong woman. But life gets more complicated and we have to be realistic. George isn't here to help you with the big decisions anymore. The upkeep on the house, managing your retirement portfolio, navigating the complexities of healthcare. It's a tremendous burden for one person." He reached into his leather briefcase beside him and retrieved the manila folder. He slid it across the polished mahogany table. It didn't make a sound, but it landed between us with the weight of a gravestone. I took the liberty of having my lawyer. He's the best in the state, handles all of the family's affairs, draw up some standard documents. It's just a simple power of attorney and a healthcare directive. Think of it as an insurance policy. It allows Olivia and me to step in and help if, God forbid, you ever need it. To protect your assets. To ensure your wishes are always honored. I opened the folder, my hands betraying none of the tremor I felt inside. The pages were dense with impenetrable legal jargon, but the titles on each document screamed their intent in plain English. Durable power of attorney. Medical decision-making authority. Advanced directive. This wasn't a safety net, it was a cage and he was holding the key. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of placid curiosity. I slowly traced a line of text with my finger. "Hereby grant my agent the authority to manage, sell, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of any and all of my real and personal property." I looked up at him, my eyes wide with manufactured innocence and confusion. "Oh my goodness, Caleb. This sounds so official. Does this mean I would have to call you to get permission if I wanted to buy a new dress?" The muscle in his jaw twitched. His smile became a thin, tight line. "Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor. This is for major financial decisions. To protect you from making a costly mistake with the inheritance George left you." There it was again. Inheritance. The word he kept circling back to, the real heart of the matter. He thought he was dealing with a small-town widow, sitting on a paid-off house and a modest life insurance policy. George was always so careful with money, I mused, looking off into the distance as if lost in memory. He used to say that the salary from his foreman job was for living, but we had to save every spare penny. We built Olivia's entire college fund that way, you know. He would have hated the idea of me making a costly mistake. "Exactly," Caleb pounced. "He would want you to be protected. This is what he would have wanted." "Perhaps," I said, closing the folder with a soft finality. "But George also taught me to read the fine print. This is quite a lot to take in for an old lady like me. I'll need to have my own lawyer take a look at it, of course, just to explain it to me in simple terms. You understand. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. For a split second, I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered fury in his eyes, a look of such intense frustration that it momentarily stunned me. He had expected a swift, easy victory. He was not prepared for resistance. He recovered, but the silken smoothness was gone from his voice, replaced by a hard metallic edge. Your own lawyer? Eleanor, that's really not necessary. It's a complete waste of money. My lawyer is the best. This is all very standard. You're making this far more complicated than it needs to be. Oh, I'm sure you're right, I said, patting his hand in a gesture of maternal condescension. But you know us old folks, we get set in our ways. It would just make my simple mind feel more comfortable. He was trapped. To argue further would be to reveal his desperation. He had to let me go, but the look on his face told me he wouldn't let it go for long. Fine, he said, the word clipped and sharp. But we need to act on this quickly. For your own good, these things are time-sensitive. I understand completely, I said, gathering my purse and sliding out of the booth. Thank you for this lovely and very educational dinner, dear. I walked out of the Gilded Sparrow, my back straight, my head held high. I didn't look back, but I could feel his eyes boring into my back, a palpable heat of frustration and thwarted greed. The cold Ohio air hit my face, a welcome shock to the system. The game had been declared. He thought he was playing chess with a pawn. He had no idea I was about to find my husband's hidden queen. The drive home was a blur. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of Caleb's condescending words, the cold legal text on those papers, and George's long-ago warning. He saw me as a doddering fool, an obstacle to be managed and then discarded. The rage that had been simmering inside me was now a cold, hard knot of resolve in the pit of my stomach. The moment I stepped inside my house, I didn't bother to take off my coat or even turn on the main lights. I went straight to the basement door, unlocked it, and descended the creaky wooden steps into the cool, still air. The basement was my husband's sanctuary, and for 2 years since his passing, I had mostly avoided it. It was a museum of a life I could no longer touch, and the pain was too acute. Tonight, however, it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like an armory. The air was thick with the comforting, familiar sense of old paper, cedar wood, and the faint, sweet aroma of George's pipe tobacco that still clung to the rafters. His old workbench sat in the corner, a half-finished birdhouse still clamped in the vise. My heart ached for him, for his quiet strength and his unwavering protection. I moved with a newfound purpose to the far wall, behind a heavy metal shelving unit laden with old paint cans and dusty jars of screws and bolts. It groaned in protest as I pushed it aside, scraping against the concrete floor. There it was, a section of the wall that looked just slightly off-color, a detail no one would ever notice. George had always said it was a patch from an old water leak decades ago. He was a man of simple tastes, but he had a mind for secrets. I ran my fingers along the edge and found the hidden seam. I pressed, and a small, almost invisible steel door clicked open. A hidden safe. My breath hitched. I went to his desk and picked up a heavy, worn copy of Basic Home Repair, a book I hadn't seen him open in 30 years. Just as he'd told me in a hushed conversation on one of his last good days, I flipped to the chapter on fixing leaky pipes. Taped inside was a small, cold, heavy key. My hands trembled as I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a rusty, grating groan, a sound that echoed in the silent basement. The heavy door swung inward, revealing a small, dark cavity packed with neatly labeled folders and thick, bound ledgers. I reached in and pulled out the first folder. It wasn't from our local Oak Creek Credit Union. The letterhead was from a private Swiss bank I'd only read about in spy novels. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers, and I felt the air rush from my lungs in a silent gasp. The balance at the bottom of the page had 7 zeros after the first 2 digits. I dropped it on the dusty floor and grabbed another. And another. Investment portfolios from firms in New York and London. Deeds to commercial properties in 3 different states. Stock certificates for companies I'd never even heard of. It was a staggering, incomprehensible fortune. At the very bottom of the safe, propped against the back wall, was a thick cream-colored envelope with my name, Ellie written in George's familiar steady script. With shaking fingers I tore it open. My dearest Ellie, the letter began, and I could hear his voice in every word. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and someone is trying to take what is rightfully yours. Please don't be angry that I never told you. I wasn't keeping secrets from you. I was keeping secrets for you, to protect you from the very vultures who have likely driven you to this safe. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face, dripping onto the crisp paper. He went on to explain everything. His father had left him a small inheritance, and over 50 years, with a quiet, shrewd, and patient strategy, he had cultivated it into a massive fortune. He hated what big money did to people. He'd seen it corrupt friendships and tear families apart. He wanted us to have a normal, happy life, unburdened by the weight and danger of such wealth. The total value of the trust he'd established for me, he wrote, was just over $33 million. I sat down heavily on an old wooden stool, the numbers swimming before my eyes. A wave of hysterical, disbelieving laughter bubbled up in my chest. Caleb Sterling, with his slick suits and his condescending concern, was trying to swindle me for a small house and what he imagined were a few $1,000s in savings, while I was, unknowingly, one of the wealthiest women in Ohio. But the letter wasn't finished. The next lines turned my shock to ice. There is more, Ellie, and you must be careful. The reason I began taking these extreme measures of secrecy was because of a man I nearly went into business with a few years ago. He's a prominent real estate developer. A pillar of the community on the surface, but a shark underneath. He specializes in deals involving the elderly. His name is Arthur Sterling. Sterling, Caleb's father. My blood ran cold. He tried to pull a fast one, George wrote. I saw his playbook up close. He finds vulnerable seniors, charms them, and then his lawyers move in. I started digging. The man has a history of it, but he's smart, he covers his tracks. I gathered what I could. It's all in the red folder in this safe. Be careful, Ellie. That entire family is poison. My hands, now numb, frantically searched the safe until they found it. A thin, plain red folder. Inside were photocopied legal documents, yellowed newspaper clippings about contested wills, and George's own meticulous handwritten notes. It detailed 2 other instances where Arthur Sterling's company had acquired valuable properties from elderly owners under highly suspicious circumstances. In both cases, the original owners were declared legally incompetent within months of the sale and moved into care facilities, their families left with nothing. This wasn't just a greedy son-in-law. This was a family business, a multi-generational enterprise of preying on the vulnerable. The last item in the envelope from George was a simple, crisp business card. It read, Brenda Ross, attorney at law. Underneath the name, George had written a short, powerful note in his unmistakable script. She knows everything. Trust her. Fight back. Don't let them win, Ellie. For me. I stared at the card, the name burning itself into my memory. My grief, my fear, my shock. They were all being forged into something new in the crucible of my rage. Something hard and cold and razor-sharp. I was no longer a frightened victim. I was a widow with a $33 million war chest, a map of the enemy's past crimes, and the name of my new general. I pulled out my phone, my hands no longer shaking, and dialed the number. Brenda Ross's office was a reflection of the woman herself. Clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of fluff. Located in a modest but respectable building downtown, it featured steel and glass furniture, abstract art, and not a single dusty leather-bound law book in sight. This was a place for modern warfare, not for pondering dusty legal precedents. Brenda greeted me at the door. She was a woman in her 50s with a sharp, tailored pantsuit, a no-nonsense haircut, and intelligent, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through you. Her handshake was firm, brief, and strong. It was the handshake of a woman who didn't lose. Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice calm and direct as she gestured for me to sit in the chair opposite her desk. I've been waiting for this call for 2 years. George prepared me for it. I'm only sorry for the circumstances that finally made you place it. I sat down, my nerves surprisingly steady. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes after the storm has already hit. I placed George's letter and the thin red folder on the polished surface of her desk. George said you knew everything. George was a smart and cautious man, Brenda said. Her gaze softened for a fleeting moment as she glanced at his handwriting. He came to see me about 5 years ago, right after his almost partnership with Arthur Sterling. He saw the predator behind the philanthropist's facade. He knew their type. He was worried that if anything happened to him, they would eventually see you as an opportunity. He predicted this exact scenario, that they would try to get close through a family connection. I was still trying to process the depth of my late husband's foresight. He knew Caleb would marry Olivia? Not the specifics but the method, Brenda clarified. A new marriage is a classic entry point for financial predators. It provides the perfect cover of family concern. So George and I went to work. We created the George Vance Legacy Trust. It's an ironclad, irrevocable trust, established offshore for maximum protection. You are the sole beneficiary and the sole trustee. In simple terms, Eleanor, that $33 million is untouchable. No one can get to it. Not even you could be forced to sign it away. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled me washed over. The cage Caleb had been building for me had no bottom. So the papers he wanted me to sign would have been a tragedy but not a total catastrophe, Brenda finished, her tone hardening. He would have gained control of your house, your car, and your local bank account. He would have been able to control your life, but he would have never touched the real inheritance. George made sure of that. The documents your son-in-law presented are a classic tool of elder fraud. They're designed to look like a shield, but they're really a complete and total surrender of your autonomy and dignity. I then recounted every detail of the past few weeks. The calculated disrespect at the wedding, the poisonous whispers to Olivia, the condescending pressure at the dinner, and Caleb's sheer, smug confidence. Brenda listened without interruption, her expression growing colder and harder with each word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. There was a long, thoughtful silence. Okay, she said finally. So our defense is perfect. The money is secure. Now let's talk about our offense. I blinked, the word startling me. Offense. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. It was the smile of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. Oh yes, Eleanor, people like the Sterlings operate on a simple principle. Risk versus reward. They assume the risk is low because their victims are typically too scared, too confused, or too ashamed to fight back. They are not counting on a victim who suddenly has access to a multi-million-dollar war chest and a file full of their family's dirty laundry. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the red folder. George did some excellent groundwork here, but it's 5 years out of date. With the resources now at your disposal, we can hire the best private investigator in the state, maybe even the country. We can dig into every financial dealing Arthur and Caleb Sterling have made for the past 10 years. We will find out who they owe money to. We will find their other victims. We will find every skeleton in their very crowded closet. We don't just expose them, Eleanor. We dismantle their entire operation. We will turn their lives so completely upside down that they will spend the rest of their miserable days wishing they had never, ever heard the name Eleanor Vance. The sheer, controlled ferocity in her voice was breathtaking. This was not just a lawyer. This was a warrior. George had chosen his general well. But Olivia, I whispered, the one weak point in my armor. This will destroy her marriage, her life as she knows it. Brenda's expression softened, becoming professional but not unkind. This will be incredibly painful for her. There's no escaping that. But what is the alternative? Allowing her to remain married to a man who is actively plotting to defraud and institutionalize her own mother? She is a victim in this too, Eleanor. She deserves the truth, no matter how ugly. She needs to make her future choices based on reality, not on the carefully constructed lies of a professional predator. She was right. I knew she was right. I thought of Olivia's trusting, loving eyes, and my resolve hardened from steel into diamond. What's our first move? I asked, my voice steady. Brenda's predatory smile returned. Our first move is to do nothing. We let him think he's still in control. We let him get nervous and make his next move. And while we wait, we gather our ammunition. She slid a business card across the desk to me. Frank Miller. He's a former homicide detective. He's discreet, he's relentless, and he's the best. Call him. Tell him I sent you. And tell him his budget is not a concern. I left her office feeling like a completely different woman from the one who had walked in an hour earlier. The fear and confusion had been burned away, replaced by a cold, clear, and exhilarating sense of purpose. I wasn't a harmless widow in a gray dress anymore. I was the sole trustee of a $33 million legacy, armed with my late husband's brilliant foresight and allied with a legal shark who was ready for a feeding frenzy. The following days were a study in controlled patience. I met with Frank Miller, the private investigator, in a quiet coffee shop far from my neighborhood. He was exactly as Brenda had described. A man in his late 50s with tired, knowing eyes, a crumpled suit, and the quiet intensity of a hunter. He listened to the entire story without a single interruption, his gaze never leaving mine. When I finished and slid the red folder across the table, he simply nodded. "I've come across Arthur Sterling's name before," he said, his voice a low gravelly rumble. "Never could make anything stick. The man's a ghost when it comes to paper trails." "My lawyer said my budget is not a concern," I stated, repeating Brenda's powerful words. A flicker of genuine interest lit up Frank's tired eyes. "That," he said, "changes things. I'll be a shadow, Mrs. Vance. They won't know I exist until I'm reading them their Miranda rights in their own living room." He took the folder, gave me a curt nod, and was gone. Now, all I had to do was play my part. The confused, frightened widow. I didn't call Caleb. I let the silence stretch, letting him wonder, letting him get nervous. I knew he would interpret my silence not as strength, but as the dithering of an indecisive old woman. I wanted him to get impatient. I wanted him to make a mistake. The wait was an agony of suspense. Olivia called, and her voice was tight with a strain she was trying to hide. "Mom, Caleb told me about your dinner," she began, her tone a careful mix of casualness and concern. "He said you seemed a bit overwhelmed by all the legal paperwork. He's really worried, you know." Every word was a small dagger. He was using my daughter as his mouthpiece, his tool of emotional manipulation. "It was just a lot of complicated legal talk, sweetheart," I said, forcing a wavering quality into my voice. "My old brain isn't as quick as it used to be. I just need a little time to think it all through." "Well, don't think too long," she said, and for the first time I heard a hint of frustration in her voice. "He's just trying to help us. To help you." He had already successfully reframed it in her mind. It was no longer him against me. It was them, the concerned couple, against my stubborn refusal to accept help. The mistake I was waiting for came 4 days after my dinner with Caleb. It was a phone call on my landline from an unknown number. On Brenda's advice, I had a recording device connected to the phone, a simple piece of tech that felt like a James Bond gadget in my hands. I let it ring 3 times, then picked up. A man with a slick, overly friendly voice, the kind you hear on late-night infomercials, boomed through the receiver. "Eleanor, my dear. David Klein calling, from Sterling Investment Partners. How are you today?" Sterling Investment Partners. He wasn't even trying to be subtle. I immediately pressed the button to put the call on speakerphone, my heart starting to race. This was it. "Oh," I said, injecting a note of frail confusion into my voice. "I'm sorry, who did you say you were?" "David Klein, Eleanor," he said with forced joviality. "Your son-in-law, the wonderful Caleb Sterling, asked me to give you a call. He mentioned that you might be looking for a way to better secure your retirement portfolio. And Eleanor, have I got an opportunity for you?" "An opportunity?" I asked, playing my part. "For me. The opportunity of a lifetime," he declared, his voice dropping as if he were letting me in on a state secret. "It's a pre-IPO offering for a groundbreaking new biotech company. It's an absolutely guaranteed home run. We're projecting it will triple in value in the first 6 months. But the buy-in window is closing fast. We're talking end of the week. It's very exclusive." It was a textbook boiler room scam. High pressure, promises of impossible returns, and a manufactured ticking clock. "Oh my goodness, that does sound wonderful," I cooed. "Triple, you say? But wiring money and all that." "Oh, it sounds so complicated. My late husband, George, God rest his soul, he always handled all of these things." "Not to worry your pretty little head about it, Eleanor," the man soothed, his condescension so thick I felt it through the phone. "Caleb is more than happy to help you with all the logistics. He just needs your authorization, of course. We're looking at a minimum investment of $50,000 to get your foot in the door. 50,000. It was a test. A probe to see what kind of liquid cash I had access to. $50,000. I stammered, making my voice tremble with a mixture of excitement and fear. Why, that's nearly all of my savings. I don't know. It's all happening so suddenly. Eleanor, trust me, he said, his voice becoming urgent, conspiratorial. You do not want to miss this boat. People would kill for this kind of access. Caleb is doing you a massive favor by letting you in on this. He truly sees you as family and wants the best for you. The call continued for another 10 minutes. I let him talk, playing the part of the confused, easily flattered widow to perfection. I asked just enough naive questions to get him to elaborate on his fraudulent claims, all while the small silent machine on my kitchen counter recorded every single lie. When I finally hung up the phone, the silence in my kitchen was profound. He had overplayed his hand. He was no longer content with the slow, methodical takeover via power of attorney. He was impatient. He was now actively attempting to commit wire fraud. This recording wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a signed confession. It was the concrete, undeniable proof I needed to show Olivia, to show the police, to show the world who Caleb Sterling really was. I picked up the phone and dialed Brenda's number. A cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. He took the bait, Brenda, I said, my voice no longer frail or confused but clear and hard as ice. And the hook and the line and the sinker. I think it's time to start reeling him in. He's getting sloppy and desperate. Brenda's voice was crisp and satisfied over the phone after I emailed her the audio file of my conversation with David Klein. The pressure is getting to him. That's perfect for us. He's emotional and emotional men make mistakes. It's time to spring the trap, Eleanor. Are you ready? Was I ready? I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. I just hadn't known it. Every time I had bitten my tongue at a condescending remark, every time I had swallowed my pride for the sake of peace, every ounce of resilience I had built over 72 years, it had all been training for this. I'm ready, I said. The plan Brenda laid out was simple, elegant, and utterly ruthless. The next morning I took a moment to compose myself, summoning the memory of every frail, frightened old woman I'd ever seen in a movie. Then I dialed Caleb's number. My hand in reality was rock steady, but I made sure to let a quaver of anxiety enter my voice. Caleb, it's Eleanor, I said, my voice thin and reedy, as if I were on the verge of tears. I heard the immediate shift on his end, the snap of alertness. Eleanor, is everything all right? You sound upset. No, dear, it's not all right, I whimpered, letting a tear I'd summoned by thinking of George roll down my cheek. That man, that nice Mr. Klein, he called me. He told me all about that wonderful investment. And it made me realize, I'm just not capable of these things. And then last night. Oh, it's silly, but I thought I heard a noise in the backyard. I was up all night just sitting in my armchair terrified. You were right, Caleb. You and Olivia were right all along. I can't do this by myself anymore. I need your help. I need protection. I want to sign those papers. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as greed obliterated any lingering suspicion. He had won. The stubborn old woman had finally broken. Then his voice, thick and heavy with false sympathy, came pouring through the receiver like warm molasses. Oh, Eleanor. You poor thing. Of course. You did the absolute right thing by calling me. I'm so glad you've come to see that we're only trying to help. Don't you worry about another thing. Can we do it soon? I pressed, letting a sob catch convincingly in my throat. I just feel so horribly vulnerable. Absolutely, he said, the excitement making his voice tight and eager. Sooner is always better. These things are best handled efficiently and quickly. I can be there this afternoon. I'll bring my notary right to your house so you don't have to go out. We'll get everything signed and settled, and then you'll be completely safe under my care. Under his care. The words were a mockery, a chilling euphemism for being under his control. Thank you, Caleb, I whispered. You're a good boy. Would 3 o'clock work? 3 o'clock is perfect, he said, barely able to contain his glee. I'll see you then. You just sit tight and try to rest. As soon as I hung up the phone, My house became a flurry of controlled, clandestine activity. Brenda arrived less than an hour later, not alone, but with two plainclothes police detectives and a young, serious-looking tech expert from the district attorney's office. They moved with a quiet professionalism that was both terrifying and deeply reassuring. The tech expert quickly and discreetly installed tiny pinhole cameras in my living room, one disguised as a screw in the smoke detector, another hidden in the spine of a book on the bookshelf, a third in a lamp on the end table. He wired the entire room for high-fidelity audio. The detectives, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miller and her tall, quiet partner, briefed me one last time in my kitchen. "He'll probably try to get you to talk about your assets, your inheritance," Detective Miller said, her eyes fixed on mine. "Let him. Encourage him. The more he incriminates himself on video, the stronger our case. We'll be in the spare bedroom just down the hall with the door closed. We'll have a live feed of everything. The moment the notary witnesses your signature on that final page, that's the moment the crime is legally complete. That's when we move in. Are you absolutely certain you're up for this, Mrs. Vance? There's no shame in backing out." I looked around my kitchen, at the crayon drawing Olivia had made for me in first grade still stuck to the refrigerator. I thought of George's letter, of his final desperate plea. "Don't let them win." "I am absolutely certain," I said, my voice clear and steady as a rock. By 2 o'clock, they were hidden away, the house falling into an unnerving silence. I changed into a simple faded floral house dress and a worn gray cardigan, the perfect costume for a frightened, defeated old woman about to sign her life away. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one facing the front door, and picked up the knitting I kept in a basket beside it. The soft, rhythmic click of the needles was the only sound in the quiet room, a steady beat counting down the final moments of Caleb Sterling's life as a free man. The fear and anxiety I'd been feigning had vanished, replaced by an icy, exhilarating calm. I was an actress on opening night, about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I was the patient, waiting spider, and my cozy, sunlit living room was the web. All I had to do now was wait for the greedy, arrogant fly to walk in. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. The final act was about to begin. I took one last, deep, theatrical breath to steady my nerves, then shuffled to the door and opened it. There he stood, a vision of smug success. He held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand, and at his side was a nervous-looking woman in her 40s, clutching a notary stamp like it was a shield. Caleb's face was a perfect mask of compassionate concern, but his eyes were alight with the unmistakable, feverish glow of triumph. In his mind he had already won. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a gentle, soothing caress. "I'm so glad we're doing this. This is Susan, my notary. She's here to witness the documents and make everything official." Come in, please," I said, my voice a frail whisper. I ushered them into my living room, my carefully prepared stage. He settled onto my sofa as if it were already his throne, placing his briefcase on the coffee table and snapping it open with a sharp, decisive click. He laid the documents out in a neat, orderly row, a general arranging his battle plans. "I can't tell you how relieved I am that you're finally taking this important step, Eleanor," he said, looking at me with what he probably thought was a comforting smile. "Now we can properly protect your interests." "All of my interests?" I asked, looking up from the sheaf of papers, my eyes wide and questioning. "All of them," he confirmed, his voice firm and reassuring. "Your financial decisions, your medical choices, even your future living arrangements. Everything. You won't have to worry your head about a single thing ever again." Living arrangements. The casual way he said it sent a shiver of ice down my spine. He had already pictured it, me warehoused in some convenient, cost-effective facility, while he and his family picked over the bones of my life. I picked up the expensive-looking fountain pen he offered, making sure my hand trembled just enough to be noticeable. "It's all so overwhelming," I said, my voice catching. "So many big words." "I know it seems complicated," he soothed, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension one uses on a small child. "But you just have to trust me, Eleanor. This is what's best for everyone." Trust him. The man who was systematically dismantling my life while promising to protect it. I leaned over the table and signed the first page, my signature a shaky spiderweb thin scrawl. I signed the second, Then I paused before the third, looking up at him, my face a mask of dawning, confused realization. Caleb, I said, my voice barely audible. There's something I probably should have told you. He leaned forward, all of his attention now laser-focused on me. The notary, Susan, shifted uncomfortably. What is that, Eleanor? He asked, his interest clearly piqued. Well, I said. I think there might be more money than you realize. From George's inheritance. His eyes, those dead shark's eyes my husband had warned me about, lit up like a Christmas tree. The mask of concern evaporated, replaced by pure, naked, unrestrained greed. More money, he repeated, his voice losing its gentle tone and becoming sharp, demanding. What do you mean? More money? He may have had some other accounts, I improvised, feeding him the irresistible bait. Hidden investments, that sort of thing. He was a very private man. I'm not sure how much exactly. How much more, Eleanor? He pressed, his voice now a low, urgent hiss. He was no longer pretending. We need to know the full extent of the assets to manage them properly. Well, I said, setting the pen down carefully beside the final, unsigned signature line. I folded my hands in my lap and looked him straight in the eye. My voice, when I spoke again, was no longer frail or confused. It was clear, calm, and as cold as a tombstone. I'm not entirely sure of the exact number, but I know it's enough to hire the best white-collar crime lawyers in the state of Ohio. It's enough to hire a team of relentless private investigators. And it's certainly enough to get the district attorney's office very, very interested in a well-documented case of attempted elder fraud. The color drained from his handsome face. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, gaping expression of utter confusion. What in God's name are you talking about? I allowed myself a small, tight, triumphant smile. I'm talking about the fact that this entire conversation, Caleb, including your plans for my living arrangements, is being recorded on high-definition video and audio. I'm talking about the 2 police detectives who are currently hiding in my spare bedroom, enjoying the show. As if on cue, the bedroom door flew open with a crash. Detective Miller and her partner stormed into the room, their badges held high. Caleb Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit a felony. The world seemed to explode into chaos. The notary, Susan, let out a terrified shriek and scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. Caleb stared, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. He looked from the detectives' grim faces to my calm one, his mind finally, belatedly, processing the sheer, stunning totality of the trap he had so arrogantly walked into. You old bitch, he spat, the venom he'd kept hidden for so long finally breaking through the polished veneer. You set me up. No, Caleb, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong above the commotion. You set yourself up. You just made the fatal mistake of picking the wrong widow. As they wrenched his arms behind his back and the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut, he was still screaming. He screamed about entrapment, about his rights, about how I would pay for this. But all I heard, as they hauled the man who had tried to ruin me out of my house in utter disgrace, was the beautiful, satisfying, and long overdue sound of justice being served.